Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Some lives are just bigger than others, and Samuel Battle's was bigger than most. In fact, it was phenomenal. Battle was the first black member of the New York City Police Department, but that's just part of the story. His life, a long litany of close encounters with the best and worst that humanity has to offer, was a case study of the joys, the triumphs, and the heartaches of African Americans in New York City in the first half of the 20th century. It's remarkable that his story is not better known. My guest is helping to change that. Arthur Browne, reporter, editor, Pulitzer Prize winner, and former colleague of mine at the New York Daily News, has written a first-rate biography of Samuel Battle called One Righteous Man, Samuel Battle and the Shattering of the Color Line in New York. Art, welcome.
Thanks,
Congratulations.
Bob. Thank you so much for your kind words.
Let's start with this. Who was Samuel Battle, and why haven't we heard more about him before now?
Well, simply put, Sam Battle was the son of former slaves, born in 1883 in New Bern, North Carolina. He was an adventurous young man, came from a very large family, decided in 1899 or so, at the age of 16, that the North would be better for him than the South, and he headed out on his own. He became something of a vagabond, found his way to New York, and then in 1911, on his own, he broke the color line of the New York City Police Department to start a long career. Now, why haven't we heard about him? We haven't heard about him because there was virtually no recognition of what he had done in the broader New York society. He knew what he had done. He knew how far he'd come. As I said, from the son of former slaves, he ends as an aide to Fiorello LaGuardia and a good friend of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
He was an unlikely pioneer. I mean, you mentioned that he grows up in the South, in the days when, it was completely the Jim Crow era, but he wasn't well educated. He's very young. He's 16, as you point out, when he comes to New York. He was physically imposing, right? But this is not if you're looking at this 16-year-old, a high school dropout, I think, you don't think that this guy's going to be anybody's pioneer, and yet, so what were these qualities that he had?
He had a number of things going for him personally. One, he was a super intelligent guy. Although he'd only finished 8th grade because he was a rambunctious kind of kid and didn't want to go to school. Early on when he was in New York, he met Arthur Schomburg. And Arthur Schomburg was one of the many luminaries that he encountered and befriended. And Schomburg told him, listen, if you want to get somewhere, you're going to have to get educated. You're going to have to read. You're going to have to read books. You're going to have to read the newspapers. You're going to have to know something. He was then working as a houseboy. And that's what he did. He took it seriously. He became a very highly self-educated man. That's one thing. Second, you mentioned that he was a big guy. He was 6'2", 240. He can handle himself. He could brawl if he had to. That was important to him on the New York City police force. Third, he was had a big, engaging personality so that he could talk to anyone. And that's how he became friends with all the big figures of black life in New York from the 1900 to 1950. And finally, I think the most sustaining force for Samuel Battle throughout his life was a sense of innate dignity and a demand for dignity that was melded with a deep Christian faith. He believed that in the dignity of all men, he believed in his own dignity, and he believed that sooner or later, good would prevail.
So he was working as a red cap as a
red
Pullman,
cap.
Pullman
Right. So at Grand Central Depot,
Yeah.
that's one of his. After he works as a houseboy in New York, he had studied how to do this. He had studied how to behave the way rich white people would want somebody to behave, how to wear gloves, how to set tables. And he eventually went to work as a red cap at Grand Central, what was then Grand Central Depot. That job in the day was an entry point for young blacks to the workforce. It was run by a man named Chief James Williams. He was an extraordinary figure himself, and he insisted on the best of service for the passengers. Battle went to work for him, became the deputy head of the Red Caps, and in that job, typical of Battle, he gets to know the celebrities and the important people who come through
His
Grand
outgoing
Central.
personality.
Yes. So he meets Enrico Caruso, who introduces him to Italian food. He meets Richard Harding Davis, who was the star war correspondent and novelist of the day, and he reads his books and discusses with them. And he meets and greets his great hero, Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. So he apparently he's not just meeting these folks; he's talking to them.
He's talking with them, and he's
them.
engaging, and he's developing relationships with them, and that carries through his entire life, as I said, all the way to becoming friends with Eleanor Roosevelt toward the end of his life.
So how do you make the switch from red cap to a member of the police force?
Okay, so as a red cap, he was a young guy. They were all young guys. He meets a woman. 16-year-old woman, Florence Carrington from Virginia. He falls in love. He's a little older than she is. They decide to get married. They have a son. Now he looks at it and says, what is my future? My future is carrying luggage for the rest of my life. My future is working for tips for the rest of my life. My future is no pension. And he looks and he says, those police officers have a pretty good salary and they get a pension. Why can't I have that job?
Why not?
So he sets out to become a cop. He's not in any way dissuaded by the thought that nobody had done it before.
No black person.
No black person had done it before. Nor is he cowed by the thought that had prevented so many from applying before. The knowledge that the New York City Police Department of that day was incredibly brutal toward black citizens. There had been white police riots against blacks. There was routine clubbings of blacks. It was not a friendly institution. So it was even difficult for black leaders to get anyone to take the civil service test. He sets out to do it. The civil service school of the day refuses to admit him, and the test was a more difficult test then than it is today, in the sense that it was knowledge-based.
He had to study for the test on his own because the
school
school would not enroll
That's
him
right. But
to prepare to take
correct.
the test.
He had to know laws. He had to know police procedures. He had to memorize the geography of New York City. It was all knowledge-based. They wouldn't let you on if you didn't show you had the knowledge. So he scores high on the civil service test by studying at night with his wife. At that point, the police commissioner has the authority, as he comes down the list, he can skip people if he wants to skip people. Battle discovers that the police commissioner has skipped him twice. One more time, that's the end of his opportunity in the police department. It's at that moment, only then does he go to seek help from a leading newspaper editor of the day, a man named Fred R. Moore, who was the editor of a paper called the New York Age,
right,
which is a black-oriented newspaper, and to my mind, was one of the great American newspapers of all time.
Which was really influential, especially in New York City at the time.
Yes, yeah. And it's been forgotten, but it is, from my reading of it, it was just a fantastic newspaper. Fred R. Moore gets behind him. Some other black advocates get behind him. At that point, the police department puts him in front of the police surgeon for his medical exam, and the police surgeon, well, wouldn't you know it, discovers that Samuel Battle has a heart murmur that disqualifies him for service.
He can't be on the force.
He can't be on the force. At this point, Sam Battle his personal physician was a man named Dr. E.P. Roberts. He was an early African-American physician, a brilliant man, struggles to find patients because of the color of his skin. And he knows that Battle's healthy, but he also knows that if he testifies to it, if he writes a letter about it, nobody's going to take it seriously. So Battle goes to a prominent white physician. The doctor writes him a glowing letter attesting to his health. Perfect health. Yeah. And at that point, they have no choice but to put him on the force.
Now, we're going to talk about his experiences, his early experiences with the police department. But before that, how did you get onto this story? And then how did you come to decide that you wanted to do a bio of Sam Battle? Okay.
In 2009, an amateur historian knew that Sam Battle had been the first African-American police officer and knew that something critical in Sam Battle's career had happened at the intersection of Lenox Avenue and 135th Street. So he persuaded the city to put up a sign calling it Sam Battle Plaza. The Daily News did a small story about it. The story called Battle the Jackie Robinson of the police department and recounted that he'd saved the life of a white officer there in black on white rioting. And because he'd done that, the white officers began to think maybe it would be okay for him to become a sergeant for the first time, commanding a black person, commanding white officers. Right. That would be a huge step. It didn't come easy, but it was to come. But in any case, the Daily News did that story. I saw it. I had covered New York City for 35 or 40 years, and I'd covered police brutality, I'd covered police issues, I'd covered Ben Ward, the first black police commissioner. And I realized, I've never thought about what had taken place. Who had broken the color line? What is this department's true history? So I went out, did the basic kind of research, found, essentially that the newspapers had written the same 20 or 25 stories about him through his career. There wasn't anywhere near enough information to write a book. But then I came across Sam Battle.
You were interested in that
I was
point
interested,
in writing a book.
Not in writing a book. I didn't know what there was, but I knew that there was a giant gap in my knowledge that I felt, I really should know where all this came from. But maybe there is a great story in this, right? But at least I should know more about it. As I said, I came across Sam Battle's grandson, who lives in California. And in the course of the conversation, he said to me, by the way, did you know that in 1949, my grandfather hired the poet Langston Hughes to write his biography? And of course, I hadn't known it. It took my breath away. And he said, I have the manuscript. So we developed a relationship. He sent me the manuscript. And from there, I was off and running. That manuscript had never been published.
Right. That's astounding. Somebody who's interested in the story, maybe writing a book, to come across a manuscript by Langston Hughes. Now, but that's just the first step. It's gold to be able to have that manuscript as a resource. Mm-hmm. But you can't just rewrite Langston Hughes's manuscript. You had to then do serious research. So talk about that a little bit.
So what happened to that book is that when Sam Battle hired Langston Hughes was long past his years as the wonderkin, young poet of the Harlem Renaissance. And he was struggling to make a living. So he took the assignment from Sam Battle for $1,500 and really wasn't interested in it. He was interested in other big projects that would keep his name and, regain essentially the fame that he had and the stature that he had. So Sam Battle had to chase him down for a couple of years to get the work done. They produced an 80,000 word manuscript in the first person, told in Sam Battle's words, but it wasn't written in a truly narrative form. It doesn't read like a compelling book. Right. Publishers rejected it. Now, The publishers could easily have worked with it to turn it into something, but the larger point was that the mainstream publishers of the day had no interest in publishing a book about a strong black hero who challenged the prevailing racism of the time, including of the NYPD.
Right.
So it was just rejected out of hand and then put away.
And so you then do the research. You decide to write this biography. Mm-hmm. And then what did you find about Battle's early experiences on the police force? How was he treated, for starters?
Okay, so when he gets onto the police force in 1911, he's assigned to a station house on West 68th Street, which was a particularly rough station house, white against the black citizenry of the area. And there was a large black population in the area at the time.
It was actually notorious.
Yes, it was. The men of the station house refused to talk to Battle for 2 years. They will say the minimal words to him, whatever is necessary on the job. Beyond that, they will not give him the tutorials that police officers need: how to make an arrest, how to avoid difficulties, how to patrol a street. The tutorials that they give to each other. They want him to fail. He finds a threatening note on his bed with a bullet hole in it, saying that if you don't get off the force, this is what will happen to you. They send a white woman to try to tempt him into a sexual affair, knowing that if they could ever catch him in a sexual affair with a white woman, that would be the end of him. And all in all, they make his life miserable, including in that day, interestingly, there were no police cars. We're still in the horse-drawn era. There's no telephones. So the police would keep a reserve group in the station house to sleep overnight. On reserve, the station house men take one bed, move it out of the dormitory, move it to an upstairs floor where it would be by itself, where Battle would sleep by itself, and that turned out to be the building's what they call the flag loft. And there they hung the American flag. And he would lay on his bed, as he recounted for years, and look at that flag and say, I'm an American. I was born here in America. Why are they doing this to me?
It turns out that he was a terrific cop, mm-hmm. and ultimately, although it's a struggle the entire time, flourishes in the mm-hmm. department. How did that happen?
Well, one, he decided that however much trouble they threw at him, he would swallow it, right? Only once does he tell them, when he hears the N-word one time too many,
right.
Listen, and he was a big guy, as I said, a boxer. I'm going down into the basement of the station house. You guys put your guns down, put your clubs down, come down one at a time. I will fight every one of you one at a time. Come on down. And none of them had the nerve to do it.
So he's down in the basement by himself.
Right. None of them had the nerve to do it.
Right.
So, but he studies. When they have him in the flag loft, he says, you won't talk to me? Fine. But one day I will command you. That's in his mind. I will give you orders. He wants to be a sergeant. So he studies for the sergeant's exam. He fights his way, and it's a difficult, difficult fight even to be able to take the sergeant's exam. Then, after that, it's still harder fight to actually win the promotion,
right.
to get a police commissioner to promote him. So he has to swallow a lot. But over time, because he is a terrific cop, because he says to himself, I'm going to be triple the cop that they are, and I'm going to help them do their jobs. I'm going to show no ill will to them, and I'm just going to prove myself till they can't tell me no anymore. And he does that by the amount of work he does, by the help that he gives to the white officers when they need help, by the cases he begins to make when he becomes a detective sergeant. And so the quality of his work is never questioned. And he gains more and more trust. Then eventually, when Fiorello LaGuardia is mayor, LaGuardia was beloved of black New York. He was a very progressive guy. although he did reflect the prejudices of his white constituents, right? This, he was not a raging civil rights advocate. But LaGuardia also knows that having a black senior officer on the police department could be very useful to him politically and could blunt criticisms that he was facing, from some black New Yorkers for some of his policies. So he turns to battle to play the role of the African-American face of the police department, and he's able to say, look, I have this man, right? And it's somewhat cynical.
So it's cynical, but it's a political asset for LaGuardia.
Right, it's a political asset. It's somewhat cynical, but battle goes, of course, he takes full advantage of it to rise up in the department.
Now, the situation was far more extreme, but as you read this book, you realize that many problems that he and African Americans were encountering in New York in those days are just so similar to the problems that we're wrestling with in this town today. What are some of the things that struck you about this story that's relevant to our time
Okay.
now?
One, there's a number. One is that through the police department's entire history, the proportion of blacks on the police force has never come close to matching the proportion of blacks in the New York City population. So when he gets on at zero, there's zero, and the New York is about 2% black. And through the years, the gap, widens and shrinks a little bit, but it never goes away, and it persists to this day. So there's a difficulty in attracting blacks to the police force.
So the department is never representative of the black population?
Numerically, and the pattern stays, so you can fairly judge that there is a distance between the department and black citizenry. Another is that through the years, whether you're in at the turn of the century or in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, there are issues that come up of over-intrusive or excessive policing of blacks by the New York City Police Department. As one example, in the 1930s, when the numbers game, which was the precursor of today's legal lottery, where people would play the numbers illegally, the police in Harlem felt completely empowered. If somebody said, I think that person is a numbers dealer or has some number slips in his or her apartment, they felt completely empowered to just walk into the apartment and do a search. Right?
No warrant,
no
probable cause, just go in.
Right. Now, you can draw a line from that to stop and frisk. It's the standards that are being applied.
Right.
Now, there are many substantive differences here.
Of course,
right. But it's the question of over-intrusiveness. And the third is that back in his day, the police were far more ready, willing, and able to shoot their weapons at basically anybody, right? With impunity. It was just incredible how they would fire their guns. But the issue tracks about who was doing the shooting and who was getting shot.
Right.
Because who was doing the shooting was primarily white police officers, and often who was getting shot were black New Yorkers. So that pattern, follows, to this day.
So we've run out of time. Unfortunately, it's a fascinating story. One Righteous Man. It's a biography of Sam Battle by Arthur Browne. Art, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Bob.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. If ever there was a sensible development, it's the campaign led by the World Health Organization to reduce smoking around the globe. Smoking is a hideously destructive habit. An estimated 5 million people die from tobacco-related illnesses each year. Smoking killed my father and countless other people I've known. So somebody please tell me why the United States Chamber of Commerce is fighting the effort to curb smoking in one foreign country after another. If Australia, for example, wants to pass laws designed to curb smoking in Australia, what's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce doing interfering in that process? Well, it's carrying the water of the American tobacco industry. According to the New York Times, the U.S. Chamber and its foreign affiliates have become the hammer for the tobacco industry, engaging in a worldwide effort to fight anti-smoking laws of all kinds. The tobacco industry has to replace all those smokers who die every day, and they do that largely by pushing their awful product on poor and poorly educated people wherever they can find them. For the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to assist in this soulless, hateful, and yes, murderous enterprise is reprehensible in the extreme. That's all for now. See you next time.